Low-carb diets have been one of the most popular dietary strategies for years, attracting followers seeking weight loss, better blood sugar control, and improved metabolic health. The basic premise is straightforward enough. Reduce carbohydrate intake, and the body shifts toward burning fat for fuel. Food companies responded to the trend by producing an entire category of low-carb and no-carb alternative products, from bread to pasta to snack bars, that allow people to maintain familiar eating patterns while technically cutting carbohydrates. The problem, according to a major new study published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, is that the way most people actually implement a low-carb diet is actively working against their cardiovascular health rather than supporting it. And the reason comes down to a distinction that most low-carb dieters are not making. The study's findings challenge the assumption that reducing carbohydrate quantity is the key variable in a low-carb diet's health effects. The evidence points to a more important factor: the quality of the foods replacing those carbohydrates, and the quality of whatever carbohydrates remain in the diet. The study and what it found. The research drew on nutrition data from nearly 200,000 people already enrolled in 3 separate large-scale studies, making it one of the more substantial datasets to examine the relationship between low-carb dietary patterns and cardiovascular outcomes. Participants reported their regular food choices, and researchers categorized those choices across several dimensions, including animal-based versus plant-based foods and whole grains versus refined carbohydrates. The data was then cross-referenced with records of who developed heart problems over the years following the initial dietary assessments. Of the nearly 200,000 participants, there were 20,033 confirmed cases of coronary heart disease, providing a substantial outcome dataset against which dietary patterns could be compared. The headline finding was that people following low-carb and low-fat diets had a 15% lower risk of heart disease compared to those not following these patterns. But this benefit was not universal across all versions of low-carb eating. It appeared specifically in participants whose low-carb diets were built around plant-based foods, whole foods, and unsaturated fats. Blood samples from these participants reflected the cardiovascular benefit in measurable ways, showing higher HDL good cholesterol, lower levels of systemic inflammation, and lower blood triglycerides, all markers that cardiologists use to assess heart disease risk. The cardiovascular picture was entirely different for people who ate low-carb and low-fat diets that were higher in animal proteins and fats and relied on refined carbohydrates for whatever carbohydrate intake remained. These participants showed a higher risk of coronary heart disease, not a lower one. The same broad label of low-carb diet was producing dramatically different health outcomes depending on the specific food choices made within that framework. Why the same diet produces such different outcomes? Lead study author Dr. Zhiyuan Wu, a postdoctoral research fellow at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, explains that the fundamental problem with the low-carb category is how broadly it is defined and how differently people interpret it in practice. People following a low-carbohydrate diet can construct it in very different ways, and those construction choices can lead to very different health outcomes. The most common version of this divergence plays out in how people choose their fat and protein sources. One person on a low-carb diet may fill the caloric space left by removed carbohydrates with nuts, olive oil, avocado, fish, legumes, and plant proteins. Another person following what they also call a low-carb diet may fill that same space with red meat, processed meats, full-fat dairy, and butter. Both diets technically qualify as low-carb by macronutrient percentage, but the cardiovascular implications of these two approaches differ substantially. The type of fat consumed, the presence or absence of anti-inflammatory plant compounds, and the fiber content of the remaining foods all influence how the diet affects blood lipids, inflammation, and arterial health over time. The refined carbohydrate problem compounds this issue. When people reduce their intake of whole grain bread and pasta, many replace them with low-carb product alternatives made from refined flours, starches, and additives that strip out the fiber and micronutrients present in whole grain versions. These products technically contain fewer carbohydrates per serving, but the carbohydrates they do contain are rapidly absorbed, producing blood sugar spikes and lacking the fiber that supports cardiovascular and metabolic health. The low-carb label on the packaging does not communicate anything meaningful about the quality of those remaining carbohydrates. The hunger problem that derails most low-carb attempts. Beyond the cardiovascular risk associated with the wrong version of low-carb eating, there is a practical problem that undermines many people's attempts to maintain the diet at all. Registered dietitian Sonia Angelone identifies it directly. Carbohydrates function as appetite suppressors because they contribute to feelings of fullness, and when people reduce carbohydrates without thoughtfully replacing them with other filling foods, they end up hungry. That hunger makes the diet difficult to maintain and often leads to overconsumption of whatever foods are available, which in a low-carb context frequently means higher-fat animal foods rather than the plant-based options that the study found to be protective. Fiber is the specific nutrient at the center of this hunger problem. Whole, minimally processed carbohydrates typically contain significant fiber, which slows digestion, expands in the stomach, and sustains feelings of fullness over an extended period after eating. Refined carbohydrates and the low-carb alternative products that replace them generally contain very little fiber. When people reduce their whole grain intake and replace it with low-carb products made from refined ingredients, they are simultaneously reducing their fiber intake in ways that increase hunger and remove one of the most important dietary levers for both satiety and cardiovascular health. Building a low-carb diet that actually protects the heart. Dr. Wu's practical guidance for people following or considering a low-carb diet centers on what he calls the quality of fat and protein sources. The key challenge is selecting high-quality sources of fats and protein when reducing carbohydrates. Not all carbohydrates need to be eliminated, he notes, and focusing on fats from plant-based and minimally processed foods is essential for maintaining a healthy, low-carbohydrate diet. Angelone's approach begins one step earlier, with an honest assessment of what the current dietary foundation actually looks like. Before making changes, it is worth asking whether protein-rich foods like eggs, fish, or tofu are already present in regular meals, whether non-starchy vegetables like broccoli, spinach, and bell peppers are providing fiber and micronutrients, and whether the fat sources in the diet are primarily healthy, unsaturated options like avocado and extra virgin olive oil, rather than saturated fats from processed meats and full-fat dairy. The practical reorientation this research suggests is a shift from thinking about low-carb as a quantity target to thinking about it as a quality framework. Reducing refined carbohydrates, processed grains, and added sugars while replacing them with plant-based foods, whole grains in moderate amounts, legumes, nuts, olive oil, and lean proteins produces a dietary pattern that the evidence associates with meaningful cardiovascular protection. Following a low-carb approach that replaces those same carbohydrates with red meat, full-fat dairy, refined carb alternatives, and processed foods produces the opposite effect, increasing rather than decreasing heart disease risk despite technically qualifying as low-carb by conventional definitions. The label describes a macronutrient ratio. The health outcome depends on what fills that ratio.